Vats, Managing Director Designate of Pidilite Industries, to deliver his keynote address. Sir.
Thank you, Parag, and thank you for the kind words. Thank you, Rajesh. I'd also like to thank CII. I can see Rajiv sitting there, and everyone for giving me this opportunity. A very good morning to all of you, to many of my colleagues, some ex-colleagues, some very good friends, and some very young. I can see Gen Z. We were talking about. Rajneet was talking about. So some lot of young people here. What I'm going to do as I speak to you is try and distill some of the learnings of the 30 years that I've had. And I want to sort of share this in two buckets, two big buckets. I think one, things that are not going to change or things that have not changed, and in my judgment are not going to change. And therefore it's also important to keep reminding ourselves, especially many of the young friends who are here and young practitioners, that we sometimes get swayed by what is the mood of the day or what is the fad, so to say. So I think that some things will not change. And then in the second bucket, I'm going to talk about what are things that are changing and how would you address them. And to make it simple, you know, I will call out the first part that is not changing much. I will talk about it under 5 P's. These will be 5 P's. So some of you here remember those 5 P's, and many of them are what the guru said, but 1 or 2 are slightly different. And then we will talk about 5 C's when we see what are the things that are changing and how we are going to address them. So let me start by first, talking about things that are not going to change and things that have stood the test of time, and my own judgment is will continue to stand the test of time in the future. And I think therefore, and when you talk of marketing, and when we are now, this is, as Rajneet said, the 8th CII Marketing Leadership Summit. So I think when you talk of marketing, I think the first thing we need to always remember is positioning or proposition. That's my first P. And I think so you can call it proposition, you can call it positioning, you can call it point of view, so you can call it brand essence, as some of the people try to call it in that parlance. But proposition on what a brand stands for is by far the most important area. Never forget that. It is something which will traverse time, and therefore your ability to deliver on that is important. I also thought that I'm coming to a marketing summit, I'm going to be talking to you guys. Only last night I asked my team to put together a few ads. I said कि अगर marketing summit में जा रहे हो तो कुछ 1-2 ads तो दिखाने ज़रूरी है. So let me sort of share with you on this context of proposition. I'll talk about 2 brands which I've had the pleasure to be associated with. I will start with the one which all of you are, I'm sure, very, very fond of, and something which I'm associated with today. So Tanvi, if I can play I'll play 3 ads on Ferricol, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then but remember, we're talking of the first P, proposition, or position. So let's play the Ferricol ads, the 3 ads.
की दुल्हन जो ब्याह के आई, संग तू सीटर सोफा ले आई। बढ़ गयो नाम सरमाइन का सोफा, हाय सरमाइन का सोफा। सरमाइन बहन का ब्याह कराई, सोफा पे नवा कपड़ा चढ़ाई। बन गयो वो बिसराइन का सोफा, हाय बिसराइन का सोफा। बिसराइन का लड़का कलेक्टर बनेलू, सोफा पे रखी चमड़ा चढ़ेलू। बन गयो कलेक्टराइन का सोफा, हाय कलेक्टराइन का सोफा। कलेक्टर की बिटिया लव मैरिज करेली, सोफा पे बंगाली किरमिट चढ़ेली। बन गयो वो बंगालन का सोफा, हाय बंगालन का सोफा। बड़ा घर का प्यार निपटाओ, सोफा सास का होने को आओ। देखी गंगा पार की शादी, देखी देश के बाहर की शादी। अब कोई ब्याह कराए या न कराए, हाय पर सोफा बनाए तो दिल से बनाए।
So as you saw, so therefore if you look at it, I think the proposition is very, very clear. It's the ultimate bond. It's you know, so when we talk about a bond, and I think you can see that bond, you can see the functionality of it, but you can also see how beautifully in the cultural context. And what I shared with you is over this of the six decade plus journey of Fevicol, 3 distinct ads from almost 3 different eras. So therefore, you know, 3 different decades. And you can see how consistently, contextually, and culturally aligned you've made the proposition, and the proposition hasn't changed. It continues to remain for the ultimate bond. And I think this, you would argue, this is a category which is adhesives, which is, you know, you don't see it, it goes into the furniture which you make or some of those kind of things, and yet you are able to do the things which you do. Let me also pick up, I think within FMCG, a category which is not so, you know, glamorous, if I can use the word, and I've had the distinction of working on that category for a long time in different roles. So let me now share with you a couple of ads of Surf Excel. Can we have 2 ads of Surf Excel, please?
Number 1 is very big. Number 2 is big. देख क्या रे, तूने मारा इसको, तुझे अभी देखता हूँ, मारता है, अभी
दाग लगने से अगर कुछ अच्छा होता है तो दाग अच्छे हैं ना। सर्फ एक्सेल, दाग अच्छे हैं।
वापस नहीं करना।
अमन,
वाह, मेरा कुत्ता, ये तो बड़ा अच्छा लग रहा है।
गरम समोसे, जलेबी गरम। अरे क्या कर रहे हो?
आज मेरी पेशानी पे किस्मत ने छुआ है। आज मेरी पेशानी पे समा खुशनुमा है
हमारे
आज
लिए
मेरी
बाकी ये सब इन प्यारे बच्चों के लिए है।
झूमा है आज मेरी परेशानी दिल किस्मत में झूमा है आज मेरी
किसी की मदद करना भी एक इबादत है और मदद करने में अगर दाग लग जाए तो दाग तो अच्छे हैं।
You saw. So I think also great ideas traverse cultures, they traverse geographies, they basically can be contextualized to festivals, to occasions, to celebrations, and they continue to run on and on. So therefore this concept of proposition, and you know, as Parag talked about Kotler and Potter, and let me also bring in, you know, a small book, I don't know nowadays whether you read or not on some of that, basically positioning by L. Rice and Jack Trout. It is absolutely nothing, everything which is said there was relevant then, it is relevant today, and I'm reasonably confident that it will be relevant tomorrow. So I think this is indeed the starting point of marketing. Never lose that, never ever. This is basically what sets the foundation of anything which you will do. What many of us did in the past when the tools and the context was different, what many of you will do today when many of those things have changed. So I think from that first P, let me now move to the second one. And I think here I want to maybe club two P's together, you know, price and product. Remember, for many of our products or the product categories which we operate in, I think product itself has a very, very important role, and nowadays sometimes we tend to undermine it. Not in technology, you clearly see, I'm thinking Apple is a classic example, or some of those places where there is a very clear standout. But I think product price combination in most countries and across the world, but definitely so in India, plays a massive role in the success of a brand. Zudio is a very recent example, many of you heard it. I think that's getting that price product combination right. But let me also share with you here an example of basically, again, Surf Excel. And I think for some of you who are very young, this may be a relatively new context. But basically just to tell you how sometimes around 2008, 2010, basically in that period, we had always started the journey on Surf with a very distinctive product. So therefore, most of the detergent products are what are called dry mix products. So whether it's your Wheel, Ghadi, Nirma, or even your Surf Excel concentrated enzymatic powders, the quick washes, and so on and so forth, or Ariel and all that. But originally Surf was built as a blow dry powder. So it's like a tower that entails capex, and basically in that tower you take this entire thing up, the main ingredients, particularly the ingredients which give you detergency and so on and so forth, and then you drop it down and mixing it with fillers which you need to in order to make that powder. Now in doing so, you would make a far more fluffy powder. So some of you who are very young may not have seen that iconic ad of Lalita ji. आधा किलो सरफ में बहुत समझदारी है. Parag is laughing, and some of us who grew up to that generation, you should now Google it and see the Lalita ji surf ad. I think the point is, it's clearly, basically, so there was a very distinctive product which was there. Now in this entire battle which ensued in the decades of 90s and early 2000s between Surf Excel and Ariel, everybody had forgotten about this product. I think this used to be about a 40,000 ton brand in mid 80s, and it was in 2008, lo and behold, a 40,000 plus kind of brand. Basically it has just sort of lingered on. But we realized that this product and the pricing which we could do, so if you look at price indexation which we talk about, the base products of laundry, which are your Wheel, Ghadi, in those days even Nirma, would be at 100. The second level products of laundry, which were Rin and Tide, were at about 200, and your top end products were at 500. This is all price indexation. I'm not saying price per kg, whatever that would be, but it's 100, 200 and 500. You could see there was a distinctive difference between 200 and 500. So basically, and there was a clear gap there. So what we did around this time, 2008 to 2010, is we picked up our good old product, which had a very clear differentiation, which I talked to you about, the original Surf. We called it Surf Easy Wash at that point in time, Surf Excel Easy Wash. And you brought it at the price, think about 300, close to about 300. So 100, 200, 300, and then 500, which is where your enzymatic concentrate powders were sitting. Lo and behold, and these are numbers because I moved out of levers in 2012, but some of this is basically now available and I can share because you see the Nielsen shares and all that. The volumes have grown almost 10x from that time, and I think so. The brand has now this particular product within the brand franchise itself is a multiple thousand crore kind of a brand, and I think that is again a price proposition which is very recently played out by Zudio as well, which many of you are very familiar with. When retail industries is struggling, Zudio has done a fantastic job with that. So therefore, the product proposition, product quality or product, and so proposition, product, and price. These are the 3 P's which are very important. Remember to always stay authentic and play all these with integrity. I think that's extremely critical when we build brands. We sometimes underestimate that. Like brands, like most individuals and institutions, will last the time, and will build over time if they are built on strong pillars of authenticity and integrity. So remember that piece. I think that's very, very important in these 3 P's. Moving to the 4th P, I think is place, where there's a lot of action which is happening now. Place is usually where you could go and distribute. So I think here the younger generation which is sitting with me here at this moment, you guys are really, really privileged compared to where we were when we started out this journey. So in about 3 decades back, whenever you would want to do a premium product, your biggest challenge would be, how do I reach to the right set of people in India? And India, as you know, is a highly fragmented country in every sense, so therefore and how do you reach that? Today, that is changing considerably for you because you have a lot of choice. You have your general trade, which continues to be very strong, will continue to remain strong in India, but you also have the modern formats which are becoming reasonably strong, and I think I would argue that in 1 million plus town, they are beginning to matter. If you look at numbers, especially for packaged FMCG, I'm now told that in million plus town, the size of the market being about $90 billion for India for total retail. Of that, basically the modern format now constitutes almost a fourth of it, so 20 to 25%. So that's sizable. Here when I talk of modern formats, I'm talking about modern trade, brick and mortar, which is available, but I'm also talking about e-commerce, and I'm definitely talking about quick commerce, which all of you are aware of. Some of you youngsters, everything's available in 10 minutes time now on Blinkits and Zeptos and Swiggies and so on and so forth. So I think this is indeed it's very good news for India because it allows you to segment, and I think marketing is all about segmentation. It's all about targeting, and therefore it allows you to now, from a place point of view, target and segment and reach out to the India you want to reach out through the multiple vehicles available to you. And I think that indeed is an important area. It's an area you should keep on working on because it's only going to grow. The other good news about India is, and I hear a lot of this thing about one channel versus the other channel, this affecting, that affecting. The point about India is an and country. India is an and country. It's a country where and strategy will always work. So therefore, you will have a robust general trade, which was there, which is there, which I can continue to see in the foreseeable future. Of course, it will morph and adapt and all that, but you will also have a lot of modern formats. So therefore, it's a combination of these two that will give you a lot of opportunities when it comes to place and making sure that your products and this thing are available. So availability and therefore place becomes the 4th P. And lastly, the 5th P, which is talked about a little bit now, was not there in the books earlier, but is now being written about a lot, is also purpose. I think brands are built with purpose. So in the things that have not changed, these are the 5 P's I want to talk to you about. But remember, purpose is very important. And purpose is very closely linked to your proposition. So what you stand for, what your position is, you've got to live that. You have to, I've seen a lot of brands which state very lofty purposes. They're very nicely worded. They're very, very lofty, but are they living it? And the strong brands will live it. So if you see the two examples, Fevicol lives its purpose of ultimate bond, of relationships, day in, day out. Whether it be with the dealers, whether it be with the users, whether it be giving respect to the society, whether it's being working with the community all the time. Similarly, if you look at Surf Excel, which is basically dirt is good or daag achhe hai, it lives this thing on social quite well again in different parts of the world in different ways. So purpose becomes important, but purpose not only defining purpose. Defining purpose is important, but arguably less important. But living the purpose is extremely important. So the 5 key things which I don't think have changed, which have stood the test of time and are likely to stay, are these 5 P's of yours, which is proposition, product, price, place, and purpose. So remember the 5 P's. Shifting gears and moving to where we are today, and maybe which is the topic of your discussion today, which Radhik spoke about, which is shaping marketing for today and for tomorrow, and the changes which are happening. Let me shift to the 5 C's. And let me start with consumers. I think the first and foremost is consumer. And many of you today sitting here in this room are Gen Z consumers that we talked about. And all of us actually as consumers today, in my opinion, Gen Z is more than others, are basically, there are 3 characteristics which define the consumer today. They are always on. They are digital first, and they are mobile first, particularly in India, arguably in the world. But I think therefore you are always on, you are digital first, you are mobile first. And that somewhat leads to what your discussions during the day are going to be. And when you look at it today, most of you are actually on 3 devices. Many of you have mobiles, notebooks or iPads, and laptops, or in some cases even now desktops. So you've got 3 devices which are running. And when some of the office devices close, the bigger screens in the home open up. So therefore, there are always 3 or 4 screens which are there, which basically today's consumer is looking at. Many of the consumers, and they are always on. I was told that today about 5,000 plus ads are being delivered to a consumer every day. I'm saying, can you imagine, in some form or the other? Now you may not be receiving it, but you're being bombarded with 5,000 plus. So that complexity has gone up considerably. I'm also told the latest data is that we spend about 6 hours, 45 minutes, closer to 7 hours on our mobile devices. That's a lot of time. And many times it is more than the time we're sleeping, many of us. So you can imagine the amount, which is basically, so therefore, that's why this becoming all the time, always on, is extremely important, and therefore recognizing that this is digital first, this is basically mobile first, and a lot of stuff is happening on mobile. So today you are basically, and also what used to be the conventional cycles of marketing, which is AIDA model, which is awareness to action, if you look at in that AIDA, is all happening sometimes within seconds, or all on the same screen. So from reaching to the consumer to basically converting it into sale is all happening on mobile. So recognizing this piece, ensuring that we are basically present in this area, that is where you have, I know, a topic on influencers that comes in. But in all of this, I do want to remind you as well that it is very easy to get carried away and say, oh, so-and-so influencer has so many followers. But does that influencer stand for? Or are you doing it with integrity? So what I mean by that is your brand in the longer term going to benefit with it as well as it is in the immediate term? And I think finding that balance is going to be very, very important. So the first C of the new piece is consumer. And we talked about everything which is changing about consumer, but remember, always on, digital first, mobile first. I think the second piece is around content. So if you look at what I shared with you is what you would usually call hero content. Because I think in our time in marketing, and that's a privilege we had in some sense, you would basically rely on hero content. You would say, you know, this, and you would do your hero content and you would be good with it. I think for all you guys now, and today and in my opinion moving forward, you've got to look at content in three pieces. I still feel that most of you and most of the brands will still need some hero content. So you will be hero content, but there will also be hub content, which is basically doing things which is contextual for that point in time. You know, that's the, and lastly, there will be content which is almost always present, so therefore you will have what is called very frequently, you know, basically you call that performance marketing, you can even call that digital marketing and so on and so forth. So the content which is, so therefore, you know, so those are the three pieces of content as well. So you will have hero content, you will have hub content, and content which you will need all the time, because you do need to keep the remaining contextual, remaining on top of it. And I think there, in the last part again, remember that is remaining contextual, doing things which are naturally in the life of a consumer is important, rather than bombarding the consumer. Because if you bombard the consumer, sometimes or the other, that may actually begin to backfire. So I think that's basically is the piece on content. So the second C is that the content is evolving. Now, in order to deliver this content, how do you work with, who are your conventional agencies, who are your other agencies? Some companies may even try and basically build their own content factories, and I think so those are the things which will evolve as we go forward. But that is for horses for courses, so it will be different for different organizations, different for different brands, different for different industries, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the piece which is to be seen. But I think in this, what I also want to underline is, I think as marketers, what we are not doing enough, in my opinion, and I think we are still basically relying a lot on external data and a lot of what is being done by others, and there is a considerable reliance on some of the big tech giants on being able to deliver many of the messages. Let me remind you that as marketers around the world, but more specifically in India, there is a lot of data available with you. And data, as they say, is the new oil, and we as marketers are not using enough first-party data. So one thought which I also want to leave you with is that you are sitting on a gold mine in first-party data. And I think marketers have, and organizations and brands have to learn to mine first-party data, understand first-party data, and build multiple things on first-party data. And let me tell you, there are organizations and brands that are doing it. So Gillette, for instance, today has 1.4 billion first-party distinct or distinct data of their consumers. That's a big number, considering, assuming it's largely males, which is not entirely true, but if it's largely male and grown up, I think you can see the amount of data they have, because you're talking, they have data for 2 out of 5 humans on Mother Earth, and then within that, if you look at a 50-50 broad this thing, you're then talking about 40% males, and within that, if you look at adults, you can see that therefore there is a very, very rich data which these guys are sitting on. Similarly, many other companies, you know, Nestle, L'Oreal, Unilever, many of the Indian companies as well. So I think, you know, particularly the companies that deliver to you and so on and so forth are sitting on a lot of rich first-party data that runs into hundreds of millions, sometimes into billions. This is extremely rich data. And therefore, beginning to understand this data, beginning to analyze this data, and therefore making use of this data is something which is very important. I will not dwell into it too much for 2 reasons. I'm not a subject matter expert on it, and 2, during the day you also have a lot of sessions on AI and so on and so forth which will happen. But building this is critical. So I want to leave you with this other message, which is first-party data is something which we should continue to look at. It's very, very critical, it's important. As an organization, we are acutely aware of it. At Pidilite, we are also working on lots of data which we have, basically, and therefore, how do we use that? How do we use that responsibly? I think that becomes important in the new world as well, as consumers are getting more clear about their consent on use of data. And therefore, we are also approaching a world which will be low cookie to no cookie world. I think, which is what is the world which you're going to look at, first party data becomes even more important. So I think that's the message I wanted to leave you with. So therefore, consumer content. And I think this also helps you build content in order to target your content, target marketing. But I'd like to then leave you with the thought of the last 3 C's, which are following these 2 C's, which is consumer and content, is once we do some of this thing well, we then build communities. New world is about building communities. Old world was also about building communities. They were called villages, they were called mohallas, they were called towns. The new world is building communities which are digital, and therefore they are basically tend to be a little bit, so you need not be staying in physical proximity. So therefore this world you could build a community which is quite dispersed, may or may not meet physically that often, but I think therefore building, but all of that can only happen if you have consumer data, first party data, and then you are looking at consumer and content, and then you build community. Once you build community, you will build connections as a brand. Connections are very important as we go forward, because connections will build relationships, will build affinity, will build equity. And basically what is something which most marketers aspire to. And finally, if we do some of these 4 C's well, a lot of that could also lead to commerce. And particularly in financial sector and some of the other sectors, you could then take the consumer all the way from consumer content, community connections to commerce. And I think, you nowadays talk about B2C brands and so on and so forth. So that, I think if I could basically, leave you with the thought on what is it for today and for the future. Remember the 5 C's, but remember the 5 P's as well, which I spent considerable time on, because foundation of the edifice is very, very important. And that's built on the 5 P's, which are not going to change. It is the 5 C's which are evolving very rapidly. I think today's day will be spent a lot on this. Use of AI algorithms, basically once you have this, AI ML, which you're talking about a lot. Use of AI built content, AI built design, some of those sessions are there, I know. We will also talk about a lot. So therefore with that, remember the 5 P's and the 5 C's. Basically there are certain things which will remain consistent. Be a marketer that builds brands with consistency, with integrity, and with a point of view. I think important brands always need to have a point of view as we go forward. But also be adaptable to what the world has to offer, what the context is today, where the consumer, as I said, is always on digital first and basically mobile first. It also, you are very fortunate to have a lot of first party data that allows you segmentation and customization almost to the level of 1. And I think particularly as I was listening to Parag in health tech, that's going to be a very important thing as we go forward. And I think that's a piece which is important. So consistency with what you build, but adaptability to what you need to build today and tomorrow are the messages I want to leave you with, the 5 P's and 5 C's. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.